In a quiet corner of Queens, New York, lived a woman named Margaret Lynn. She was 52 years old, widowed, and had raised a son all by herself. Each day she pushed a small cart, selling Southern Slail braised pork knuckles, standing silently beneath the subway overpass where hundreds of people rushed past without ever stopping. Her life passed in silence and endurance. To the world, she was just another aging street vendor, hunched over, unnoticed, like someone who had never known youth, never dared to dream. But behind her tired eyes and calloused hands was a woman who had once loved fiercely, lost deeply, and carried dreams greater than the city around her. Those dreams had long been buried under betrayal, hardship, and time. Margaret had no idea that within days everything would change. Her story was about to be rewritten, and it would all begin with a hungry child, a stolen pork knuckle, and a stranger carrying secrets no one could have imagined. To most New Yorkers, Margaret Lynn was just another fading figure, on the edge of a city that never paused. Every morning she appeared in front of the Lexington Avenue line, where swarms of commuters rushed past. And though the scent of her simmering pork knuckles filled the corner with warmth, few ever stopped. "Move it, old lady," a tall man barked as he nearly tripped over her cart. No one apologized. No one cared. There were only glances of disdain, murmurs of judgment, and footsteps too hurried to notice the human behind the vendor. One afternoon, while Margaret was carefully wrapping an order for a loyal customer, a young man suddenly stormed up to her cart. "Your son owes me 20 grand. Pay up." "Do you have a loan note?" she asked calmly. "I don't need one. Pay or I'll smash this cart to pieces." People stared, but said nothing. No one stepped in. Margaret simply sighed and glanced at her boiling pot. Then a small voice broke the tension. "Ma'am, I'll take one. My grandpa will pay later." She turned to see a boy, maybe 6 years old, his face smudged but eyes bright with honesty. Margaret gave him a gentle smile. "All right, let me pick you the biggest one." It was the first time in years Margaret felt truly seen, not as a burden, not with pity, but with something far rarer: trust. That day, the boy really did come back. His name was Milo, and he lived in the Bronx with his grandfather, a man named Charles Dawson, who worked as a driver for a chain of upscale hotels. "Milo told me you make the best pork knuckles in the city," Charles said as he approached. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, dressed modestly, but his smile was warm and disarming. Margaret paused for a moment. It was the first time a well-mannered man had stopped at her cart just to compliment her cooking. "I don't get that kind of praise often," she replied hesitantly. Charles chuckled. "My grandson's not easy to please. If he says it's good, you can take his word." From then on, Charles and Milo became regulars. Every afternoon, the two would swing by, eat together, and chat with Margaret about anything: weather, cars, childhood memories of New York. Margaret never imagined she'd laugh like that in the middle of the street. This man, simple, unpretentious, not flashy, somehow made her feel unexpectedly safe. One evening, as Margaret was packing up her cart, Milo leaned in and whispered, "If you became my grandma, Grandpa wouldn't be lonely anymore." The words were soft, innocent, but they landed deep in Margaret's chest. She didn't respond. She simply looked across the street at Charles, standing there with a box of pork knuckles in his hands, smiling gently, waiting. One early autumn afternoon, as golden sunlight washed over the quiet streets of Queens, Charles Dawson approached Margaret Lynn's cart holding a small envelope. "This is for you," he said, placing it gently on her table. Margaret opened it. Inside was a check for $5,000, 0 cents marked clearly, bride price. She froze. "Charles, are you being serious?" "Dead serious," he said, voice low and steady. "I don't have much, but if you'll have me, I'd be honored to call you my wife." Margaret smiled faintly and shook her head. "I'm too old to start over." "And I'm too tired to end alone," Charles replied. Neither of them noticed that across the street, Liam Lynn, Margaret's son, had been watching it all, his eyes narrowing. Days later, Liam showed up at his mother's apartment, looking worn out and desperate. He brought a stack of papers, pleading with her to sign so he could open a business. Trusting him, Margaret signed without reading. But it wasn't a business license. It was a $100,000 0 cents blank loan agreement, with Margaret as the guarantor. When Charles found out, he tore the papers apart in fury. "You're scamming your own mother for money?" he roared. Liam sneered. "And who the hell are you to interfere? Some broke old driver? My mother deserves more than you." Charles said nothing. He simply stood up and held Margaret's hand, her fingers trembling, caught between two men, one offering quiet love, the other carrying cold ambition. There, under the glow of streetlights and the roar of passing taxis, Margaret realized something she had long tried to ignore. Blood doesn't always mean family. On the day of their engagement shoot at an upscale bridal studio in the Upper East Side, Margaret Lynn found herself, for the first time in her life, stepping into a pristine white wedding gown. The dress had been chosen by Charles Dawson himself, custom-tailored, lined with imported Italian lace and studded with fine crystals. Margaret couldn't believe that someone who once sold pork knuckles on a street corner was now staring at her reflection as a bride. But that moment of peace didn't last long. "Margaret?" A familiar female voice called out from behind. She turned. It was Vera Coleman, her former high school classmate, the same one who had once spread rumors that led to her expulsion. "This is the dress you chose? Not afraid you'll ruin its value?" Vera smirked. Margaret stayed silent, trying to walk away, but Vera wasn't finished. She pulled forward a middle-aged man and declared, "He says he had a fling with Margaret at a motel back in 1989. Isn't that right?" The room went quiet. Staff members began whispering. Margaret froze. History was repeating itself. Once again, someone tried to drag her name through the dirt. But this time, Charles stepped forward. "I'm her fiancé, and I know everything about her past. There's nothing to hide." Then he turned to the man. "How much did she pay you for this performance?" The man gave a sheepish grin. $200, cash." Vera's face turned pale. Gasps rippled through the room. Then Charles pulled out a Golden Boss business card and placed it gently on the counter. "My name is Charles Dawson, CEO of Dawson Group," he said, his voice steady as thunder. "And this woman you're trying to humiliate? She's my fiancée. Insult her again, and you insult me." All the whispers vanished. Margaret said nothing. She could only look at the man beside her. Because for the first time in her life, when someone tried to break her, there was a man who stood beside her, not for appearances, not because of proof, but because he believed in her. After the smear at the bridal studio, Charles Dawson couldn't stay silent. He trusted Margaret, deeply. But trust alone wasn't enough. He needed the truth, not just to protect her, but to bring justice to a past that had never been made right. Quietly, he asked his assistant to investigate Margaret Lynn's history at Jefferson High, where she had once been a top student, yet was inexplicably expelled during her final year. When the investigative report arrived, Charles was shaken. Inside were old letters, the paper faded, the ink violet. They were from Margaret, written to a pen pal known only by the name Evan. The letters were tender, full of youthful dreams and sincere affection, raw pieces of a 17-year-old girl's heart. Then came the blow, a scanned copy of an anonymous letter sent to the Jefferson High Board in 1989. It accused Margaret of inappropriate relations with a stranger, claiming she was using the name Evan to conceal her actions. The letter was signed Vera Coleman. Charles froze, because he was Evan. Back then, they had never met in person, just two teenagers connecting through the written word. Charles had planned to visit her one day, but suddenly the letter stopped. No explanation, no goodbye. He thought she had moved on. He never imagined she had been ripped away. At Jefferson High's 60th anniversary, Charles walked in with Margaret by his side, a silent declaration. Guests turned. Whispers followed. None knew that a truth buried for over 30 years was about to come to light. When the principal took the stage, his voice was calm but firm. The student who was wrongfully expelled was Margaret Lynn, and the person who forged the accusations was Vera Coleman. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Vera stood frozen, speechless. Margaret didn't cry. She simply tightened her grip on Charles's hand, as if to say, at long last, the world had finally listened to her side of the story. After her past was finally cleared, Margaret thought she could finally enjoy peace with Charles, but lurking in the shadows was a danger far worse than anything she had ever faced. Liam Lynn, her son, had vanished for weeks after Charles exposed his loan scam. When he reappeared, he came with tears and apologies. "Mom, I messed up," he said, voice low. "But I want to start over. I've found an investor. All I need is your signature to match their funds." Margaret hesitated, but the mother in her couldn't say no. Charles, however, was wary. He quietly ordered a private investigator to watch Liam's movements. Soon, Charles uncovered the truth. Liam was working with Vera Coleman, the very woman who ruined Margaret's youth. Together, they were planning something far more sinister, a kidnapping. Their plan was to stage a fake robbery, abduct Margaret, and hold her in an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn. Then they'd demand $1 million from Charles in exchange for her release. It seemed foolproof, but they didn't know Charles had hidden a tracker in Margaret's purse. The night Margaret was lured into a business meeting, she was blindfolded and shoved into a van. She stayed calm, even as fear clutched her heart. In the cold warehouse, Vera emerged with a chilling smile. "You took everything from me. Now it's my turn." Behind her stood Liam, silent. "You really want this?" Margaret's voice cracked. "I may be poor, but I gave you all I had." Liam's expression flickered, but Vera snarled, forcing a contract in his hands, demanding a transfer of Margaret's assets if Charles didn't pay. At that moment, sirens wailed. The warehouse doors crashed open. Charles burst in, flanked by police and his assistant. "Don't touch her!" he shouted. Vera was arrested on the spot. Liam tried to run, but was quickly tackled. Margaret collapsed, trembling as Charles caught her in his arms. "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears. "I never thought my own son—" Charles held her tightly. "Family isn't just blood. It's who stays when everyone else walks away." As red and blue lights flashed around them, Margaret realized something heartbreaking yet freeing. She had lost a son that night. But she had also found someone willing to risk everything to protect her. After the kidnapping, Margaret was emotionally shattered. Her body was unharmed, but her heart was bruised in ways she couldn't explain. Hurt not by strangers, but by the very son she gave life to. Charles never left her side. He didn't say much. He just held her hand, quietly, every time silence settled between them. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across the little patio where they often drank tea, Charles finally spoke. "You once said you didn't deserve a wedding dress. Let me wear the suit and wait at the altar, just to prove you've always deserved the best." Margaret smiled faintly. Her eyes were still red, but now they shimmered with something softer. 2 weeks later, one early winter morning, Charles brought her to the central tower of Dawson Hospitality, where he was the CEO. On the rooftop garden, amidst wind-swept greenery, he opened a velvet box. Inside sat a radiant blue diamond ring. "Margaret Lynn," he said, eyes steady. "For years, I searched for someone who didn't care for wealth or titles, only for honesty and love. That person is you. Please, let me marry you. Openly, proudly, and with all the dignity you deserve." Margaret cried, not for the ring, but because for the first time in her life, someone wanted to lift her up, without shame, without conditions. It was simple, warm, no crystal chandeliers, no diamond rings, just golden candles, white roses, and people who truly cared. Milo, the boy who once asked for pork knuckles at Margaret's cart, now wore a little black suit and proudly handed over the wedding rings as their tiny officiant. "From today, I officially have a grandma," Milo declared, then kissed Margaret on the cheek. She couldn't hold back her tears. Charles took her hand and, standing in the middle of the garden, said, "Margaret Lynn, you are the most precious part of my life. No past can diminish you. It's those scars that make you beautiful, so beautiful that I want to protect you forever." Music played. They didn't dance much. Just stood close, cheek to cheek, silent. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding. It was a real one. The kind where two people who had lost everything still found the courage to love again and to choose each other one more time. A month after the wedding, on a gray January morning, Margaret Lynn and Charles Dawson drove to the Brooklyn Federal Detention Center. The steel gates opened slowly, heavy and cold. They had come to visit Liam Lynn, the son who had betrayed Margaret, now awaiting trial for conspiracy to kidnap and extort. The visitation room was modest. When Liam stepped out, shackled, thinner than before, his eyes avoided his mother's. The silence hung thick in the air. Then, Margaret broke it first. "How are you, son?" Liam was quiet for a long time. Then, suddenly, tears welled in his eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was selfish. I didn't think about what you went through. I only thought about money. It wasn't until I lost everything that I realized you were the only one who never gave up on me." Margaret looked at her son, not with anger, nor sadness, just quiet sorrow. "I forgive you, Liam, not because you deserve it, but because I won't let hatred consume my heart." Charles remained silent, gently placing his hand on Margaret's shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Liam choked back a sob and lowered his head. "I'll do my best here. I want to start over. If I still have a chance." Margaret gave him a soft smile, her eyes calm. "There's always a chance," Margaret said softly. "But this time, son, walk forward not because I push you, but because you finally want to stand." When they left the detention center, the sky was still gray, but Margaret's heart felt light. She no longer carried the weight of the past, only love from a kind husband and hope that her son might become a better man one day. That evening, in the penthouse overlooking Midtown Manhattan, Margaret, Charles, and Milo sat down for dinner. The boy beamed as he spoke about his art class. Charles watched Margaret in silence, his eyes full of quiet contentment. Amid the glitter of the city, they no longer had anything to prove. Because true happiness, sometimes, is simply to be forgiven, to be loved, and to have chosen the right person no matter how late it arrives.